Today's session of First Draft's Vaccine Inside Flexible Learning course is all about how to trace courses. If it's your first time here, don't worry. We've designed this course to be snackable, where you can jump into any of these sessions independently of the others, but they also all build together. So if after today's session you think, I really wish I would have been here for the ones before, don't you worry. We will share the link to the Vaccine Insights Hub at the end, or you can find the recordings of previous sessions and also links that you can register to the next sections that are upcoming. So we are going to be doing 4 things today together. First, we're going to lay some basic concepts down on what we mean when we talk about interrogating and investigating sources. I'm going to give you 3 golden rules or 3 habits to live by that have been tried and tested by my colleague Shayden Urbani from the US office. We're going to look through tips and tactics for digital investigations. And then we'll talk a little bit about automation. And that's bots or cyborgs and all of these different things that sometimes we use and we talk about almost like if they were synonyms, but they're really not. For those of you who haven't been to these sessions before and you don't know me, my name is Laura Garcia. I am the training and support manager at First Draft, and you can find me on Twitter at LauraGRB. My DMs are open. Happy to chat about any and everything that has to do with online investigations and disinformation. Let's go through some basics. We talked a little bit about this in our previous session, but it's really worth revisiting. At First Draft, we use 5 pillars to drive all of the investigations that we do online, whether we're looking at an image or a video or a tweet or an account. And these pillars are meant to be 5 driving questions that you can use to interrogate any piece of content online. Now, they might not necessarily give you really specific, clear answers, but hopefully by having 5 places to start looking, you can eventually piece enough information together to get to the answer you're looking for. Verifying and doing verification work online is a little bit like being a detective. You are going to have to find clues and start to see what the puzzle looks like and then make an informed decision of whatever it is that you're analyzing. Our 5 pillars are provenance, source, date, location, and motivation. The most important one, though, is provenance. Everything that you see online probably came from somewhere else, or most things at least, right? Think about the nature of the internet and how we communicate with each other. You share something, you forward, you remix, you memify, right? So that means that whenever you encounter anything online, your very first question should be, am I looking at the original? How can I verify that? And if it doesn't look like I'm looking at the original, how can I trace it back as much as I can to find the original source? Hopefully you'll find that original source, but even if you don't, tracing back that journey will tell you a lot about that piece of content and the narratives that it fits into. So provenance should be always your first starting point and the most important one of all of these pillars. The next one is source. So if you manage to find the person who originally published this information, who are they? What can you find out about them? How can you independently verify their identity, right? And if you can't trace it back to the original, what can you learn about the source of the information that you first encountered, right? Who else does it link to? What language does it tweet in? All those kind of things. Date and location are intimately linked. And this is, again, remember, we're trying to find the original in all the cases. So just because I put a picture, for example, on my Instagram today and say, oh, it's a lovely snowy day in London, well, that doesn't mean it's either from today or from London, right? Actually, if you looked at any weather channel online, you'd see that it's not snowing in London. And that's what I mean. Like, all of these things can be independently verified, and it gives you a place to start. And the last one, which is the most complicated one to get a really clear-cut answer, is motivation. Why would someone want to create content like this? And I say the word content because this can be images, websites, videos, documents, anything, right? And that why question is always going to be more of a guess than a certain answer, but it might give you clues of how it fits into other narratives. So here are some of the questions that you can interrogate or you can ask about a source. And think about a source not as a person or an individual account, but a piece of content. right? That is the source of the information that you're investigating. So who uploaded it? Is it possible that they uploaded it, but they weren't the ones who created it? Look at other stuff they're publishing. What does that tell you about the account? Does it make sense, for example, that the person who holds the account is where they say they are? If I randomly start posting images from Thailand, does that make sense? Or can you find any evidence, for example, that I went there to travel on holiday? And can you find any contact information? So here are Shay's 3 habits to live by. The first one, do a reverse image search. The power of a reverse image search as part of your workflow is immense. It's super low cost, really quick, but more often than not, it'll give you really interesting results that'll help guide your investigation. Let me give you an example. This is a very clear case of she should have reverse image searched that. We found this particular case through Ken Klippenstein's Twitter account. He's a journalist and an investigator in the States. And what he found was that a woman called Dr. Naomi Wolf, you can see her Twitter account here on the left-hand side, tweeted out an image of a man who is wearing doctor scrubs, like the outfit that doctors wear, and with a little quote. So a bit of backstory. Dr. Naomi Wolf is known for publicly talking on Twitter of her hesitation around vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines specifically, and just all of the language that feeds a little bit of fear and doubt into the whole vaccination process, right? She got this particular image as a message through her Twitter DMs. And it kind of came with a message that said like, hey, Dr. Naomi, I'm a huge fan. Here's a picture of me doing my work. And if you look at the picture, because it's the one on the right, it's a man who is using all of the visual clues that we use to identify doctors. Think back to when we discussed about how imposter content is some of the easiest and most effective types of disinformation. And then the quote in the front, if a vaccine is effective, then why do you need to pressure people to take it? Informed consent means letting patients make their own choices. Dr. John Sims, MD. So not only does he look like a doctor, the picture says he's a doctor, right? And the quote isn't necessarily outright anti-vaccines. It's just more fitting into that narrative that we've also talked about before of liberty and freedom, right? That vaccines or health decisions should be your own because it's your body and no one has a right to tell you what to do. So when Dr. Naomi Wolf saw this image come through her Twitter DMs, it fit all of her pre-existing narratives of vaccines. So she tweeted it out. And it turns out that this man in the picture is none other than a very, very famous pornographic actor in the United States who's called Johnny Sins, S-I-N-S, instead of Sims like in the picture. Speaks to his profession, right? And he'd done it as a joke. He was trying to trip her up. And he actually ended up even retweeting Dr. Naomi Wolf's original tweet and kind of making fun of the whole situation. What is the moral of the story? That a quick reverse image search would have shown her that this man is a doctor, right? And now this in no way defends the content that Dr. Naomi Wolf puts out on her Twitter account, but just as an example of how easily a reverse image search would have thrown up this man's face, because he's everywhere, he's really famous, he's a little bit of a celebrity in the United States. Second habit, look for primary sources. So if someone's saying, I can't believe NASA just said X, go and look at NASA's website, right? Look for the primary source of the information. Here's a couple of examples. On the left, you see some books that you can find on Amazon by a Dr. Gordon Peterson. And Dr. Gordon Peterson's thing is that silver is the next big thing. It can cure everything, even COVID, and he's pushing his books really hard, trying to get lots of people to buy them. If you go to LinkedIn, there is a Dr. Gordon Peterson PhD listed there with a ton of different medical degrees. Now, LinkedIn is a platform where people are more encouraged to be truthful about their professional experience because a lot of us use it to find jobs. But I can still go into LinkedIn and write that I've done a billion things that I haven't. So LinkedIn is not a primary source, but it does give us a place to start looking. Because LinkedIn says that he's based in Utah in the United States. Utah and a lot of states in the United States have individual licensee lookup and verification systems. So for all of the professions where you're licensed to practice, like doctors or lawyers or dentists and all that kind of stuff. And if we go to the source, to where someone's license would have to be publicly held for them to practice as a doctor, there is no record of a Gordon Peterson at all. Now, if you come from a country like mine, my home country of Mexico, where we don't have fancy websites with people's licenses on them, we could have called the hospital that he says he works for, or some of the places that he says he's worked for before, right? There are ways to do this kind of investigation by going straight to the source. Another example, this one came from one of our investigative researchers called Lydia Morris. She got this email on the left-hand side, and it looks like it's an email from the National Health Service in the UK saying, it's time to book your vaccine, very excited, click on this link, right? Lydia, because she works at First Draft, has learned to have alarm bells in her head. So she thought, this seems a little bit too easy. She's young. They're starting vaccinations with older people. Let's go and check at the source. So she just typed into her browser NHS vaccination like booking, and she found the website on the right-hand side, which is the genuine one. Look at how similar they look. Someone has actually gone through a lot of effort to try and make the one on the left, which is a scam website, because it eventually asks you for like your credit card details. They want it to look like the real thing, right? So by checking the source, you could have make sure that you weren't tricked or duped. A little pro tip, when you hover over a link, you can see it down here. This is the one of the links further down in that form on the left-hand side that Lydia got. If you hover over a link, it'll display a preview of the link that it's sending you to. So this is trying to send you to swattraonline.com/JS, which looks nothing like many of the addresses that the government has in the UK, right? So that is already fishy. Alarm bells everywhere. Looking at the source would have saved you that trouble. And another one. This one came from Daniela Costa Ramos, who's one of our investigative researchers who looks at Latinx communities. And it is of a portal that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, has called VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. The VAERS is a place that collects information of adverse reactions that people have to the vaccine and then displays them as a little dashboard like you see on the right. And screenshots like the one on the right have been making their way through Spanish language social media, whether it's Facebook or Messenger or WhatsApp, because they look really impressive. And they say, look, according to the CDC, there's been 500 deaths after the vaccine and more than 11,000 cases of injury after receiving the vaccine. You shouldn't take it. You should be very afraid. Fits into that narrative of fear, right? But if you actually go and check the source, if you go to VAERS's website, you would find an incredibly vital piece of information, which is that this website contains information of unverified reports of adverse effects. Reports are accepted from anyone. So again, it means that I can go in and type in 10 different reports that never happened and say, I got the vaccine and got this, I got the vaccine and grew wings or whatever. And this website would hold them, because what it's trying to do is to do kind of crowdsourcing of information, right? But if you don't know that and all you see is this scary screenshot of the dashboard, then obviously you're missing vital information to make sense of that dashboard. And here's where checking the source would have saved that confusion. And this is something that we can all help our friends and families and our communities do, and our audiences and the people that we work with. And the last one, sometimes picking up the phone or walking outside or actually going to check something physically is the quickest way to verify source or anything. We forget that because some of these examples that we're talking about exist in our digital space mediated through screens, that we are still nonetheless talking about humans and our communities and the spaces that we inhabit and the places that we go, even though right now we can't go to a lot of places. And sometimes the quickest and easiest way to verify something is just by doing a little bit of human in-person, offline, analog reporting. So just to keep that in mind. Right, let's look at some other tips for digital investigations. Whenever you're looking at an account online, and in this case, we have a Twitter account as an example, but it can be an Instagram account, a Facebook account, a TikTok account, any kind of account. Think of all of the information that's already there for you to dig into and verify. For example, the profile photo. Can you reverse image search it? A lot of us are not that creative with the profile photos that we use, right? So the one on Twitter will be on Instagram or we somewhere else. Or it came from a public website, right? Or it's the one that they took for your headshot at work, and that'll help you find other places where that image has been published before and trace back someone's identity. Or for example, what's the cover photo? What does that tell you about that person? What is their handle? The name? Can you find that handle on other platforms? If they mention a profession, sorry, can you find that title or in that person on LinkedIn? Can you verify them, for example, on their company's website? So if you were trying to verify my Twitter profile, I say I teach at First Draft. And if you look at First Draft's website, you will find me listed there. And that helps you kind of confirm it at least one step removed, right? When did they join this platform? And also, what kind of content do they post? What language is it in? What is it about? Is it about football? Is it about science? Is it about space? Does that kind of make sense with what this account is trying to portray itself as? And it's also important to remember that none of these things on their own are an answer. So, for example, there are legitimate reasons why citizen journalists or people who are reporting from areas of human rights crisis might not want to use their real face or their real profile photo, right, to maintain some sort of anonymity. So having, for example, if you see that their profile photo is a stock image, that might not necessarily mean they're not who they say they are, right? None of these things are definite answers. They're just red flags and things that you can investigate. Even the name and the handle, right? So I know, for example, a couple of researchers in the disinformation space who don't want to be easy to identify online because of the type of work that they do. So their Twitter handles are like AR53, whatever, whatever. So if you just judged it straight by that and went, that's not a real person, you'd actually be wrong, right? All of these things are just clues to investigate. There's a particularly useful website called Twitonomy that is free to use. You just have to log in with your Twitter account. And what Twitonomy does is that it helps you understand the behavior of a particular Twitter account. And it takes a little bit of time. It thinks about the account that you've asked it to analyze. And here we're, for example, looking at the same account we were looking at before. And it'll quickly give you a rundown of their tweet history, their average of tweets per day, what percentage of their tweets are retweeted. And these are all, again, trying to be beginning points of investigations or red flags that you can start to dig into a little bit more. But in the same way, they're not necessarily direct indications of automation or that something fishy is going on, right? So if we think back to the latest administration in the United States, for example, the Twitter account that belonged to the president behaved very differently to how it's behaving now, but there was still real people behind them, right? So all of these red flags are just red flags to dig into more. Some of the other cool things that Twitonomy lets you do is see which other users do they retweet the most. So you can figure out these networks of support. Which users do they reply to the most? What are the hashtags that they use the most? Does that give you an understanding of the kind of content that they're involved in, or if they're part of a bigger campaign? It also looks at their most popular tweets. What is the language like? What words are they using? And also, when do they tweet, right? Most of us need to sleep every once in a while. And it means that our tweeting patterns tend to go down as we sleep or as we take a break. And that can also be an indicator that something or some level of automation is going on. But again, remember, none of these are definites. There's ways to schedule tweets, right? You can even do it directly on TweetDeck or with third-party software. So all of these together start to help you piece the puzzle. And Twitonomy is a really good way of getting a snapshot analysis of the behavior or particular account that you're looking at online. Now, a source can also be a website, right? We're not just speaking of source as something that a person specifically does or represents themselves online. And there's tons of tools that are free that help you do digging into websites. One of our favorite ones is called viewdns.info. And viewdns.info lets you do a ton of stuff. You can see a screenshot of it on the right-hand side. But one of the most useful things that it lets you do is that it lets you look at the registration information of a website. So for example, whenever you buy a URL, which is a domain, you have to publicly leave a registration record of that by the person who is telling you that. And you can do a little bit of digging into that information. But there's other things that you can do when it comes to websites. So you can look for suspicious URL endings. You can find other versions of the site. So sometimes, for example, if a website gets taken down because it's putting out problematic content, they'll kind of be reborn somewhere else, but they'll mask the registration information of the new website, but not of the old one. Or you can use a reverse IP search, for example, to look at other sites hosted on the same server. So for example, I buy server space for my personal website, and at different times I've used that server space to also host websites for different projects that I've been involved in. And if you reverse IP search one, you'd find the other project that I'm also hosting in the same space, right? Let's give you an example. These are screenshots of a Spanish language website called tierrapura.org. Tierra pura means pure earth. And this website normally publishes problematic content around vaccines. It's very anti-China, very anti-Chinese and xenophobic in its language, anti-globalization, that kind of stuff, right? And on the right-hand side, you have an article that says people who have been vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine are still getting COVID. So how is it that the benefit outweighs the risk, right? If we do a whois reverse to look at the registration information on this website, can you see the bit that we've kind of highlighted with the square? There's two interesting bits of information here. The first one is that the server is epic.com, epic with a K. And that is the same server used to host Parler or 8chan or Gab, which means that it's a server that websites go to when they're maybe afraid that they might be taken down if they're hosted somewhere else, right? The second really interesting thing that we learned is that it was created on the 31st of March last year. So this website is a year and a day old. And that means that it was very new. It was obviously created in reaction to the pandemic. And again, these are interesting clues to start piecing your puzzle together, right? None of these directly give you an answer, but digital investigation online is exactly like digital investigation online. There's a lot of digging that you have to do to eventually start to see the full picture. Last thing, understanding automation. So the question when you're looking at an account online shouldn't be, is this account automated spreading misinformation? It should just be, is this account spreading misinformation? For two reasons. One, automation is actually really hard to detect in a really precise way, although there's people who are really good at it. But the most important thing is that even if you had 5,000 bots all tweeting at the same time about the same thing, if there weren't people willing to believe the content of those tweets, for example, then these bots would not be a problem, right? In the end, it's all about people and the narratives that we're willing to take part in and the fears that we are manipulated by. And that's an important thing to remember, right? Not to disregard that there are obviously very real automated campaigns, sometimes even orchestrated by governments or institutions. And it's also important to remember that there's a thing called cyborgs, which are people who exhibit bot-like behavior, sometimes because they're paid. So people will get paid to post a certain number of times a day about a specific topic, or maybe because they're just really keen supporters of a policy or a candidate or a different issue. Or they're half and half, right? Part of it is automated, part is actually handled by a person. So don't be too quick to just write everything off as a bot or that it's automated. These four different topics or like buckets, however, can help you detect flags or indicators of levels of automation. Look at the account. We've talked about some of these before. When was it made? Is there no personal information? What kind of hashtags are they using? What's the language that they tweet in or they post in? What kind of content? That's the second one. Is it more than one language? Are they normally spamming? Really weird ways of using a specific language or a word or a phrase. And then on the right-hand side, you've got activity. Do they not sleep? Or does it seem like they don't sleep? Lots of retweets or at specific times or specific spikes in activity. And the last one is network. So this account doesn't exist in a silo. Who else is it talking to, right? Who else is it connected to? Who does it retweet? Who does it follow? All that kind of stuff. You can find this and way more information on our essential guide on verifying online information in the training section of our website.